They gave me the corner seat. That was the first sign. In 11 years of working alongside human delegations at the Salvari Reach, I had never been placed in the corner. Interpreters sit at the envoy's shoulder, close enough to catch the subvocal frequencies that Reach species use for emphasis, close enough to whisper without interrupting the formal record. The corner seat is where you put someone you expect to become irrelevant before the session ends. I noted it. I said nothing. I arranged my translation equipment on the narrow shelf they had provided and watched Senior Delegate Arvind Sol settle into the primary chair at the far end of the table with the particular unhurried quality of a man who has already won. The chamber was the smaller of the two assembly halls, the one used for administrative proceedings rather than open session. No gallery, no public record feeds. 12 members of the Credentials Oversight Committee seated along the curved wall, their robes the deep gray of the Reach's administrative tier. Solzaid stood at the door with a data slate. Everything had the texture of a formality that had already been resolved in a room I had not been allowed to enter. Ambassador Dina Force sat across from Sol. She had come with 2 staff members, a junior attaché named Kale and myself. That was the full human presence in the hall. 3 people to answer for 11 years of human representation inside the Salvari Reach framework. I had worked with 4 for 6 of those 11 years. I knew her tells, the way she placed her hands flat on the table when she was preparing to absorb something rather than respond to it, the particular stillness that came over her face when she had already decided the shape of a conversation and was waiting for the other party to arrive at the starting line. Her hands were flat on the table. Her face was still. I remember thinking, she knows what this is. Sol began. He was precise about it, which I had expected. The Reach's administrative tier favors precision the way some bodies favor ceremony. He walked through the credentials nullification instrument clause by clause. The human delegations standing within the Salvari Reach framework, he explained, derived entirely from the founding charter of the Joint Liaison Office, filed in the 3rd year of the mission. A review of that charter had revealed what he called a procedural irregularity of material significance. The charter had not been filed by an entity with recognized standing under assembly jurisdiction. It had been filed by a private individual. He let that sit for a moment. A private individual, he continued, held no jurisdictional standing before the assembly. The charter was therefore void from inception, void ab initio in the assembly's legal language. Every credential, every authorization, every protocol access that derived from it was similarly void. The human delegation had been operating for 11 years on documentation that did not legally exist. The nullification instrument, he said, had already been entered into the permanent record. There was nothing to vote on. He was informing Ambassador 4 as a professional courtesy. He folded his hands. I looked at 4. Her hands were still flat. She had not moved. Solzaid opened the door slightly. A signal, I understood later, that the session was considered concluded. For said, the individual who filed is present in this room. That was all. Sol looked at her. Then, for the first time, he looked at me. I had not known, not consciously, not in any way I could have articulated before that moment. What 4 had done 11 years ago when she first arrived at the Salvari Reach as a junior attaché on a 6-month assessment posting. I had not known because she had not told me, and I had not asked because I was a translator and my function was language, not logistics. I knew she had filed the founding charter. I had been present when she submitted it. What I had not known, what no one in that room had known except 4, was that she had filed it under her own name, not under the delegation, not under any assembly-recognized entity, under her own individual accreditation, which she had held for 4 years before the posting began, which had been issued by a licensing body that operated entirely outside Salvari Reach jurisdiction. She had told me this once, in passing, in the 6th year, in the way you mention a thing that no longer seems relevant. I had not understood what she meant. I am not certain I had been listening carefully enough. I understood it now. The Assembly's archival system, which had been queried as part of the nullification instrument process, had, in disclosing the procedural irregularity, also disclosed everything that attached to the filing. The individual accreditation. its licensing body, its scope, and appended to the original charter in an annex that Seoul's legal team had apparently not read to its conclusion, a succession instrument. 11 pages, filed at the same time as the charter, notarized by the same licensing body. The succession instrument specified that in the event the charter was ever declared void, administratively suspended, or nullified by any body, its operational scope, every protocol access, every corridor authorization, every network node that had been built under it, would transfer automatically to the individual accreditation of the filing party. To 4, not to the delegation, not to any assembly-recognized entity. To a private individual, operating under a licensing framework the Salvari Reach had no jurisdiction over and no mechanism to void. The archival system had disclosed this in its filing summary. The filing summary was now part of the permanent record. The nullification instrument had entered it there. I watched Seoul read the summary on the data slate his aide had brought him. I watched the aide read it over his shoulder. I watched 2 members of the Credentials Oversight Committee lean together and exchange something in the subvocal register I was trained to catch. What they said, translated precisely, was, "We have made this worse." For sat with her hands flat on the table. She did not look at Seoul. She looked at the wall, where one of the Reach's procedural seals was mounted, a thing she had probably looked at hundreds of times across 11 years of sessions in rooms like this one. Seoul set the data slate down. He did not speak for some time. The nullification instrument, he finally said, would need to be reviewed. Stood. She gathered her materials. She nodded to Kale, who rose, and then she looked at me, and I rose, and the 3 of us walked out of the chamber. She did not speak until we were in the corridor. Even then, it was not much. She said the succession instrument had a 60-day notice window before it converted the corridor authorizations to permanent individual grants. She said she assumed the assembly would want to schedule something before then. She was correct. They did. I was asked to give testimony before the closed review panel 8 days later. They wanted to establish the sequence. When the charter had been filed, what I had witnessed, whether I had any knowledge of the succession instrument at the time. I told them what I knew and what I had not known and the precise order in which I had come to understand it. The panel chair asked me, at the end, whether I believe the ambassador had intended the outcome from the beginning. I thought about that for a moment, about the corner seat, about her hands flat on the table, about 6 years of working beside someone and assuming that what you were not told was simply not relevant. I told the panel chair, I think she filed what she needed to file 11 years ago, and then she waited to see if it would ever matter. The Assembly scheduled the new framework session 41 days later. It was held at a location outside Salvari Reach space. The first time in the history of the Reach that any formal proceeding had been held beyond its own jurisdiction. That location had been specified in the Succession Instruments Annex. Ambassador 4 had chosen it 11 years ago.